Christmas Eve. My son slid a contract across my own table and smiled like he'd already won. "Just sign it, Dad. It's a formality." But page 7 said otherwise, 90 days, and everything I owned would be gone. I looked up, let my hands shake just enough. "Maybe I'll read it tomorrow." They relaxed. Big mistake. Because I'd read it 3 weeks ago. They thought I was slipping. What they didn't know was I was counting every move, every lie, and building something that would break them first. One small thing before we start: if you have a second, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever trusted someone with everything only to find out they had a plan of their own? Yes or no, I read everyone. I'm glad you're here with me for this one. A few details in this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes. The lesson at its core is what truly matters. The envelope landed on the table between the gingerbread and the cold coffee, and my son told me the house wasn't mine anymore. I'm Vernon Holbrook, 71 years old, retired diesel mechanic with 35 years of engine grease permanently tattooed into the creases of my knuckles. I sat at the head of my own dinner table on Christmas Eve in the house I'd paid off in 1997 with overtime checks and a second mortgage that nearly killed my marriage. And I watched my eldest son slide a thick manila envelope across the tablecloth like it was a holiday card. Tyler Holbrook, 42. My son, though the word felt heavier that night than it ever had. He'd been a real estate broker once, before the market corrections and the bad bets and the clients who stopped returning his calls. He'd shown up 14 months ago with his wife and a rented truck and a story about temporary setbacks. The setbacks never ended. But apparently the paperwork had. "Dad, this is just formalizing what we already agreed to," Tyler said. He had his mother's eyes and his mother's gift for making dangerous things sound reasonable. "It's better for everyone." Amber sat beside him. Amber Holbrook, 38. Tyler's wife, a woman I'd met exactly twice before she moved into my guest room. She dressed too sharply for a family Christmas in a working-class Detroit kitchen. Back straight, phone face down on the table, the posture of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "We looked into it with our financial advisor," Amber added. "It protects you too in case of liability." I opened the envelope. The Christmas lights above the sink reflected off the stapled pages, red and green, sliding across words like irrevocable and transfer of deed. I turned to page 7. My calloused fingers traced the clause I already knew was there. "Let me tell you something about mechanics. We don't fix anything until we understand exactly what's broken." And what was broken here was spelled out in 10-point font on page 7, paragraph 4. Automatic transfer of full ownership after 90 days of non-payment on a collateralized loan. The loan Tyler had called temporary. The collateral Tyler had called just a formality. I counted backward from December 24th. 87 days remained. I looked up from the page. Tyler was watching me the way people watch old men scanning for confusion, for hesitation, for the slow blink that means the words aren't landing. I gave him exactly what he expected. "Let me read it again in the morning," I said. "My eyes aren't what they used to be." Amber's shoulders dropped a quarter inch. Relief. Tyler nodded and reached for the gingerbread. They thought I hadn't understood. I understood everything. I'd understood it 3 weeks ago, actually, when I pulled the photocopy from my filing cabinet in the workshop. Every document I've ever signed in my life has a copy in that cabinet. A mechanic's habit. When you rebuild a transmission, you keep the old gaskets until you're sure the new ones hold. I'd read the clause under a 60-watt bulb at 4 in the morning, and I'd done the math, and I'd said nothing. Because silence is a tool, same as a torquey wrench. You use it when the bolts need to be loosened, not tightened. They cleared the table around 10. Tyler washed the dishes he always did when he wanted something, the same way he mowed the lawn the week before, asking to borrow my truck in high school. Amber dried. I said goodnight and walked down the hallway to my bedroom, the one at the back of the house where the floorboards creak in 3 specific places that I know by heart, and they don't. I sat in the chair where Doreen used to read. 35 years I worked on diesel engines in this city. My hands rebuilt transmissions that weighed more than my son. Those same hands held a pen 14 months ago and signed away the house those hands paid for. Not because I was foolish, because my son asked me to help him, and I believed that's what it was. The wooden box sat on the shelf where it had been since October of the year before. Small walnut hand-sanded. Doreen gave it to me on my birthday 3 weeks before the cancer one. She said, "Open it when you need to remember who you are." I hadn't opened it, not at her funeral, not during the months of silence that followed, not when Tyler arrived with his truck and his story. I picked it up. Something shifted inside, light papery sliding from one end to the other. I held it in both hands and felt the grain under my thumbs. Doreen's hands had sanded this. She'd made it in the garage, probably while I was at work, probably while she was already sick, and didn't tell me yet. I put it back on the shelf. Not yet. Whatever was inside would wait. I had 87 days, and I needed to think like what I was, a mechanic. Diagnose first, disassemble second, fix what's broken third. But only after you understand every moving part. I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark. Through the wall, I could hear Tyler and Amber whispering. Their voices rose and fell in patterns I couldn't quite decode, except for 2 things that came through the plaster clearly enough to make me sit very still. A name I'd never heard before, and a dollar amount that told me this wasn't about my house. This was about something much bigger. Something that started long before Tyler pulled into my driveway with a rented truck and a rehearsed smile. I sat in the dark and I listened, and I began to plan. The name I heard through the wall that Christmas Eve was Vance. The dollar amount was 6 figures. I filed both in the same place I file everything quietly, permanently, where no one thinks to look. But that night didn't start on Christmas Eve. It started 14 months earlier, on an October afternoon when my son pulled into the driveway with a rented moving truck and a wife I'd met exactly twice. Tyler backed the truck over the curb and onto the grass I'd reseeded in August. Amber stepped out of the passenger side in heels that had no business on a cracked Detroit driveway. They started unloading before I finished my coffee. "Just a couple months, Dad," Tyler said, carrying a box marked office past me on the porch. "Until we're back on our feet." I watched them unload for 2 hours. 14 boxes marked kitchen, a filing cabinet, a standing mirror taller than me, winter coats, 3 of them, heavy wool still in dry cleaning plastic. "You don't bring winter coats for a couple of months." I said nothing. I helped carry the filing cabinet up the stairs. That first afternoon, while Amber arranged the guest bathroom like a woman setting up a permanent residence, I walked past the back bedroom and saw Tyler inside. He had a tape measure stretched across the far wall. He was writing the dimensions on his phone. He didn't see me. A tape measure on day 1. There's a memory I carry like a stone in my chest. My boy, 7 years old, standing at the chain-link gate of my machine shop at 6 in the evening on his birthday. I'd forgotten. The foreman had called in sick, and I'd pulled a double, and by the time I looked at the clock, the cake Doreen made was already cold on the kitchen counter. Tyler was standing at that gate in his good shirt, holding a flashlight because it was getting dark. He didn't cry. He just turned around and walked home. I've been paying for that walk ever since. So when I saw the tape measure, I closed my mouth. When I noticed Amber counting the kitchen cabinets the next morning, writing figures in a small notebook, I poured her coffee and said nothing. When Tyler started parking in the center of the driveway instead of to the side, I moved my truck to the street. Because that's what guilt does. It turns a 71-year-old man who rebuilt Caterpillar engines for 3 decades into someone who gives up his own parking spot to a son he failed. "Yula, we'll take the back bedroom," Amber had said that first day, smiling the way salespeople smile. We don't want to impose on your space at all. She wore perfume that filled the kitchen like a declaration. Too strong for a working-class house on Werner Highway. Too deliberate for a woman who was supposedly just passing through. 3 weeks later, the document appeared. It was a Tuesday in November. Amber set a thick stack of papers on the kitchen table between the salt shaker and a plate of toast I hadn't finished. Tyler stood by the sink with his arms crossed, looking at the floor. "It's purely procedural, Dad," Amber said. Her voice was smooth, practiced the tone of someone explaining a product. "Your name stays on everything. We just need a temporary guarantee for the lender, so Tyler can secure capital for the new venture. A mechanic knows when a part is counterfeit. It looks right, fits right, even works for a while. But the weight is wrong. That document weighed wrong in my hands. Too many pages for a simple guarantee. Too much fine print for something purely procedural. I should have called a lawyer. I should have set the papers down and said I needed a week. I should have trusted my hands, which had spent 35 years telling the difference between factory parts and forgeries by feel alone. But Tyler was standing at the sink, and he wasn't looking at me, and I could see the back of his neck, and for a moment he was 7 years old again, standing at that chain-link gate with a flashlight. "Did Dad just sign it?" he said quietly. "It's a formality." I picked up the pen. I signed where the sticky tabs pointed. Page 3, page 5, page 9. I didn't read every line. I read enough to know it was about the house, about collateral, about temporary terms that would expire in 12 months. I told myself the words meant what they said, but I looked at my son's hands while I signed. A mechanic noticed his hands. Tyler's were shaking. Not much, just enough to rattle the coffee cup he was pretending to drink from. A tremor in the fingers, a whiteness in the knuckles. That's not nervousness. That's the vibration of a man who knows exactly what's happening and can't stop it. He knew what that document was. He knew, and he watched me sign it, and he said nothing. Amber collected the pages before my coffee went cold. She slid them into a leather folder I'd never seen before. Dark brown, monogrammed with initials I didn't recognize. The kind of folder that costs more than my monthly electric bill. She did it the way people collect their belongings after a closing, quick, efficient, no eye contact. The papers were in the folder, and the folder was in her bag, and the bag was zipped shut before I'd set the pen down. I sat there with my empty cup and my empty hands, and I understood something I couldn't yet name. The feeling you get when a counterfeit part clicks into place and the engine runs fine, and you know in your bones that something is going to fail. Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon, and badly. Tyler washed my coffee cup. Amber went upstairs, and somewhere in that monogrammed folder handled by hands that knew exactly what they were doing, my house began to disappear. Those initials on the leather folder bothered me for 3 weeks. Gold-stamped serif font, the kind of monogram you pay extra for. Not Tyler's initials. Not Amber's. Someone else had prepared that folder before it ever reached my kitchen table. I didn't sleep well the night after signing. By 5 the next morning, I was in the garage workshop with my photocopy spread under the fluorescent light, reading the document the way I used to read engine schematics, line by line, pencil in hand notes in the margins. The fluorescent tube buzzed the way it always did, one end flickering slightly. The concrete floor was cold through my slippers. I had a mug of instant coffee on the workbench, unwashed from the day before, the bitterness cutting through the smell of motor oil and old rags that had lived in this garage longer than my children had lived in this house. Page 1 was what Amber said it was. Standard language about collateralized lending. Page 3, same. Page 5, the signature tabs, nothing unusual. Page 7, paragraph 4, subsection B. Buried in language so dense it might as well have been written in a foreign alphabet. But I've spent 35 years reading technical manuals that engineers wrote to be deliberately confusing. And legal language is just another dialect of the same thing, words arranged to hide the mechanism inside. The clause said this: if the underlying loan goes unpaid for 90 consecutive days, ownership of the collateralized property transfers automatically to the lender's designated recipient. No additional signatures required. No court filing needed. Just silence and time and a clock that was already running. You want to know why I didn't call a lawyer that morning? Because calling a lawyer means you've decided your own son is your enemy. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So I did the next best thing. I checked my bank records. The loan Amber had mentioned, the one Tyler supposedly needed my house as temporary collateral for, I searched every account, every statement, every automatic withdrawal going back to the signing date. No payments had been made. Not one. Not a single dollar had moved toward that loan since the day I put my name on the paper. The clock wasn't just running. It had been designed to expire from the start. I counted forward from the signing date. 87 days remained. They didn't need me to do anything else. They didn't need another signature, another conversation, another Christmas dinner with an envelope. They just needed me to sit still and let the calendar do the work. I circled the clause with my pencil. I wrote the number 87 in the margin. And then I sat on my workbench stool in the pre-dawn dark and I thought about my son. Not the man upstairs sleeping in my guest room. The boy. The machine shop was on the east side near Eastern Market. I worked there from the time Tyler was 2 until he graduated high school. 12-hour shifts, sometimes 14. Diesel engines don't care about your family schedule. A Caterpillar C15 with a cracked head gasket doesn't wait until after your kid's birthday party. Tyler turned 7 on a Thursday. I was supposed to leave at 4. The foreman called in sick, and I pulled the second half of his shift because we had a fleet contract deadline, and I was the only man in the shop who could true a flywheel by sound alone. By the time I looked at the clock, it was 6:15. Doreen told me later what happened. Tyler put on his good shirt, the blue one with the collar, and walked 6 blocks to the shop by himself. He stood at the chain-link gate at the entrance, holding a flashlight because the streetlights on that block were out. He waited. I don't know how long. Doreen said he came home at 6:30, walked past the birthday cake on the counter without looking at it, and went to his room. He didn't cry. That was the worst part. A boy who cries you can hold. A boy who just turns around, that's a wound that doesn't close. Guilt is the most reliable engine I've ever seen. It never stalls, never overheats, and it runs on nothing but memory. Every favor Tyler asked me for after that night had the ghost of that chain-link gate behind it. The truck in high school, the co-signed apartment lease, the startup money that vanished, the second startup money. And finally, 14 months ago, the house itself. Just sign it, Dad. I heard the gate clang shut every time. And every time I signed, sitting in that cold garage, I understood something that hurt worse than the clause on page 7. Tyler wasn't just using my guilt. He'd been calibrating it. Every ask, every favor, every just this once, it was all measured against that birthday, against that gate, against the look on a 7-year-old's face that I never actually saw but have imagined every day for 35 years. I wasn't a good father when my son needed me most, and now he was using that failure as a lever to take everything I'd built since. Was it fair? No. But I understood the engineering of it. I understood the precision. I folded the photocopy and slid it back into my filing cabinet behind the truck title and the property tax receipts. And that's when I noticed something I'd missed before. On the last page of the document below Amber's signature line, there was a second set of initials. A witness line. Not Tyler's handwriting, I know his scrawl from 20 years of birthday cards. These initials were written in a hand that was practiced, deliberate, and old. The pen strokes of someone who signs legal documents the way I turn a wrench from long habit. Someone else had been in the room when I signed. Or someone else had handled those papers afterward, adding their name to make the transfer hold. I closed the cabinet. I washed my coffee mug. And I started counting the 87 days I had left to figure out who those initials belonged to. I spent 3 days trying to match those unknown initials to anyone I knew. I checked old Christmas cards, business cards pinned to my workshop corkboard, even the signature on my property tax assessor's letters. Nothing matched. Whoever witnessed that document existed in a world I hadn't entered yet. Then Wren came through the back door. She never knocked. Wren Holbrook, 35. My youngest daughter worked the pre-dawn shift at a bakery on Michigan Avenue and carried flour dust in her hair like other women carried perfume. She set a 5-pound bag of all-purpose on the counter and looked at me with an expression I recognized. From her mother, the face Doreen made when she had something to say and was deciding how gently to say it. "Dad, I need to talk to you before they come downstairs." Tyler and Amber were still in the guest room. I poured Wren coffee and sat down. "Leo told his father what's happening," she said. "About the documents, about Tyler and Amber. His father heard the name Vance and went quiet for a long time. Then he said he wants to meet you. I didn't ask for a lawyer, Wren. You don't have to do everything alone, Dad. Not this time. For 35 years, I fixed things alone. Transmissions, fuel lines, a marriage that was leaking from both ends. Asking for help felt like admitting the machine was beyond repair. But my daughter was standing in my kitchen with flour on her collar and worry in her eyes, and I'd already spent 3 sleepless nights staring at initials I couldn't decode. So I said yes. Leo Prescott picked us up the following week. 33 years old Wren's boyfriend, a final-year law student at Wayne State. He had the careful posture of a man who measured every word before spending it. He drove us downtown without small talk, which I appreciated. Small talk is what people use when they're avoiding the subject, and we were well past avoidance. Nash Prescott's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Griswold Street that had seen better decades. Leo's father was 60, a veteran real estate and criminal attorney whose office smelled like old leather and closed cases. He had a handshake that matched mine, calloused firm, the grip of a man who'd done physical work before he did legal work. "Mr. Holbrook," he said, "Leo tells me your family has crossed paths with the Vance name." Something shifted in his voice when he said it. Not anger, something older than anger. The way a man says the name of a town he was run out of. I filed that away. "I didn't know the name until recently," I said. "My daughter-in-law's maiden name, but it seems to carry weight I wasn't aware of." Nash didn't respond to that directly. Instead, he asked for my documents. I handed him the photocopy. He put on reading glasses and went through it the way I'd gone through it page by page, pencil in hand. When he reached page 7, he stopped. "You found this yourself. I read everything I sign, eventually." He turned to his computer. A few keystrokes and the Wayne County property records filled the screen. He typed in my address. The result loaded in 3 seconds. Nash looked at those county records the way I look at an engine that's been running on the wrong fuel. Not surprised it broke, just cataloging exactly how much damage was done. "Your name was removed from this deed 72 hours after you signed," he said. "That's not an oversight, Mr. Holbrook. That's a schedule." I'd suspected it. Hearing it confirmed was different. Suspicion is a guess. Confirmation is a wound with an address. Wren's hand found my forearm under the table. I let it stay. Nash outlined the legal path. He could file a challenge based on fraudulent inducement, the argument that I was told the document was temporary collateral, not a permanent transfer. But arguments need evidence. He needed proof that Amber had made specific promises before the signing. Emails, texts, anything that showed her verbal guarantees contradicted the written terms. Without evidence of what she told you beforehand, Nash said, "It's your word against the document. And documents win." I sat with that for a moment. My calloused hands looked wrong on his polished conference table, rough skin on smooth wood, 2 surfaces that didn't belong together. I thought about the filing cabinet in my workshop. I thought about the emails Amber had sent me in the weeks before the signing, the ones where she'd written in plain language that my name would stay on the deed, that the guarantee was purely temporary, that nothing would change. I'd saved every one of them, not because I suspected anything at the time, because that's what I do. A mechanic keeps the old gaskets. I have emails, I said, and text messages. She told me in writing that my name would stay on the deed, multiple times. Nash set his pencil down. Leo leaned forward. Wren's grip on my arm tightened. How many messages? Nash asked. Enough. For the first time in days, I felt something that wasn't dread. It wasn't hope exactly, more like the feeling you get when you find the right wrench after searching the wrong drawer for an hour. The problem was still there, but now I had a tool that fit. We shook hands and headed for the elevator. Leo held the door for Wren, then pulled her aside in the hallway. I was 3 steps ahead when I heard him whisper something. I caught only 3 words before the elevator doors closed between us. My father's case. Wren stepped into the elevator a moment later. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and suspicion, like a woman who just learned that the help she'd asked for came with a history she hadn't been told about. I didn't ask. Not yet. I had emails to organize and 80-some days to spend wisely. But I noted the look on my daughter's face and filed it where I file everything quietly, permanently, where no one thinks to look. I didn't ask Wren about Leo's whisper. Whatever Nash Prescott's history with the Vance family was, it had brought him to my side of the table, and right now that mattered more than his reasons. Imperfect allies are still allies. I'd learned that much from 35 years on a shop floor. I pulled into my driveway that afternoon and saw Hank Stanton standing on the sidewalk with his phone held at an angle that had nothing to do with making a call. Hank Stanton, 68, retired carpenter. My neighbor for 10 years, the man who helped me reshingle the garage roof the summer Doreen was sick. He had the posture of a dog caught on the wrong side of a fence, guilty, but not quite sure what to do about it. His phone was aimed at my front porch, and when he saw my truck, he lowered it too quickly, the way people lower binoculars when the subject turns around. A small notebook stuck out of his left jacket pocket. I could have confronted him. I could have walked across the lawn and asked him who he was photographing my house for and how much they were paying him. But confrontation is a young man's tool. I'm 71. I use patience. I climbed out of the truck slowly. I added a limp I didn't have. "Hank, you mind giving me a hand?" I called across the yard. This back of mine, I swear it's getting worse every week. His shoulders dropped with relief. "Sure thing, Vern. You ought to see someone about that. 10 years I knew that man. He helped me carry Doreen's hospital bed up the front steps when hospice delivered it. He brought corn from his garden every August, 12 ears in a grocery bag with my name in marker. Now he was taking pictures of my house for the woman who was stealing it, and he helped me carry grocery bags up those same steps without meeting my eyes. I watched him closely while we walked. He put the notebook in his left jacket pocket. Same pocket. A man who reports to someone keeps his notes where he can hand them over fast. I cataloged it the way I cataloged engine symptoms, not with anger, but with precision. I played the part. I fumbled with my keys at the door. I asked him what day it was, even though I knew. I let my voice wander the way old men's voices wander when they're losing the thread. Hank nodded along, his relief growing with each stumble. When he left, he walked to his own house without looking back. He didn't take any more photographs. But the notebook was still in his pocket, and I knew those notes would end up somewhere I'd eventually need to trace. I let him go. A spy you know about is more useful than a spy you've confronted. That evening, after Tyler and Amber went upstairs, I went to the garage. The house was quiet, except for the furnace clicking and the November wind rattling the side door. I hadn't eaten since the meeting with Nash. My mouth was dry and my hands were steady, which is the combination I've always worked best under. A filing cabinet is a strange kind of weapon. It just sits there rusting quietly in the corner of a garage, holding everything you were smart enough to keep and they were stupid enough to write down. I pulled open the second drawer. The metal screech echoed off the concrete walls. Behind the truck title and the insurance papers, I found the folder I'd been thinking about since Nash asked his question about evidence. Amber's emails. 3 of them printed the week she sent them, because I print everything. The first one, dated 2 weeks before the signing, read like a sales pitch dressed as family concern. I held the thin paper under the fluorescent light and read her words again. Dad, rest assured we'll take care of everything. Your name will still be on the papers. This is just a procedural step. The second email was more specific. She mentioned the guarantee by name and promised it would expire automatically after 12 months. She wrote that I'd never need to do anything else. She used the word temporary 4 times in 3 paragraphs. The third email was the shortest. Just 2 lines. Nothing changes for you. Your name stays on the deed. Tyler and I are handling the rest. I set the emails down and found the text message I'd screenshotted from my phone. Tyler's words the morning of the signing. 5 words that would matter in a courtroom. Dad, sign it. It's a formality. 3 emails. 1 text. Every one of them a lie written down and sent through a system that keeps receipts forever. Amber had been careful about the contract, buried the transfer clause deep, used language designed to confuse. But she'd been careless about the courtship. She'd promised things in writing that the document contradicted on every page, and she'd trusted that a 71-year-old mechanic wouldn't know the difference between a promise and a trap. I photographed each document with my phone, front and back. I checked the resolution. I saved them in a folder I named with a date and nothing else. Then I locked the originals back in the cabinet and closed the drawer. Mechanics don't fix things by feeling. They fix things with evidence. Now I had the first piece. I was reaching for the light switch when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Detroit area code. No name. 6 words on the screen. I know what the Vances want. I stood in my garage, one hand on the light switch, the other holding a phone that had just told me someone out there knew the name I'd only spoken once in Nash Prescott's office, behind a closed door. I hadn't told Hank. I hadn't told Tyler. I hadn't even said it aloud in my own house. Someone else was watching this situation, and they wanted me to know it. I turned off the light and stood in the dark for a long time, the phone glowing in my hand like a fuse that hadn't been lit yet. I never replied to the anonymous text. Whoever sent those 6 words about the Vances wanted me to know I wasn't alone. That was enough for now. I saved the number, locked my phone, and went to bed with the name Vance turning slow circles in my head like a bearing that needed grease. 2 days later, I walked into my own kitchen and didn't recognize it. Doreen's cast iron skillet was gone. The hook by the stove where it had hung since 1981 now held a gleaming non-stick pan with the price tag still dangling. The spice rack, the one Amber had built over the weekend without asking, blocked the window above the sink. The window where I'd watched 40 years of Detroit sunrises while waiting for the coffee to finish. The coffee machine was gone too. My percolator, the one with the cracked handle that Doreen and I bought at a yard sale on Michigan Avenue the year Tyler was born, had been replaced by a pod machine that looked like it belonged in a dentist's office. When I opened the pantry to find my grounds, I found a combination lock on the inside latch. I stood there looking at that lock for a long time. A laminated chore schedule was taped to the fridge. 4 columns: Tyler finances, Amber household, Cohen homework, and my name listed under a single word yard. Doreen seasoned that cast iron skillet for the first time in 1981. She burned the first batch of oil and laughed until she cried. Standing in this same kitchen with smoke rolling toward the ceiling and me opening every window in the house. 41 years of flavor built into that metal layer by layer, meal by meal. Now it was in a box, somewhere replaced by something with a lifetime warranty and no life at all. Amber appeared in the doorway. She wore slippers that matched the new kitchen rug, both purchased, I assumed, with money that wasn't hers. "Morning, Dad," she said. She punched the combination into the pantry lock without offering me the code, pulled out a single coffee pod, and handed it to me. "Here, let me show you how the new machine works." I fumbled with the pod. I turned it the wrong way. I asked her to show me twice. She sighed. She slowed her words the way people slow their words for children and the elderly. I cataloged every syllable. While she loaded the pod for me, I let my eyes drift across the fridge. Beneath the chore schedule, tucked under a magnet shaped like a mitten, was a real estate flyer. The headline read, "Senior Living Solutions, Comfort and Community." There was a photograph of a building surrounded by manicured grass and empty benches. It looked like a hospital pretending to be a hotel. I said nothing. I took my coffee and shuffled to the table. The front door banged open at 3:15. Cohen Holbrook, 8 years old. Tyler and Amber's son, my grandson, came through it like a small weather system backpack, dragging sneakers, scuffing the linoleum. He dropped his bag on the floor and wrapped both arms around my legs. "Grandpa, look what I made." He pulled a sheet of construction paper from his backpack, a crayon drawing of a house. But it wasn't this house. This one had a garden with red flowers and an American flag on a pole out front. The windows were large and evenly spaced. It looked institutional. You spend your whole life building something with your hands. A house, a family, a reputation. And then one afternoon, your 8-year-old grandson draws you a picture of the cage they're building. And he's proud of it, because it has cable television. "Ma, that's real nice, Cohen. Where'd you get the idea?" "Mommy showed me a picture. She said that's where Grandpa's gonna live. It has a TV in every room." My hands went still on the table. "When did Mommy say that?" Cohen shrugged the way children shrug with his whole body. "When Daddy was on the phone with the Vance man." The Vance man. Cohen said it the way he'd say the mailman or the plumber. A title, a function, someone who came and went in the adult world he hadn't learned to question yet. But I heard it clearly. The Vances weren't just connected to the documents. They were on the phone with my son discussing my future, while my grandson colored at the kitchen table. This wasn't just about taking my house. They were planning to warehouse me. 300 miles away, in a building with gardens and flags and televisions in every room, where nobody would notice when I stopped mattering. "That's a fine drawing," I told Cohen. I patted his head. He grinned and ran off to find his tablet. Amber's voice murmured from the next room, another phone call, another conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I stood up from the table and walked into the hallway. My phone buzzed. Same unknown number. Same Detroit area code. But this time it wasn't words. It was a photograph, a scanned document slightly crooked on the scanner bed with Tyler's signature at the bottom. The date on the document was 3 weeks before I'd signed the guarantee. 3 weeks before Amber handed me that stack of papers at the kitchen table. 3 weeks before Tyler stood at the sink and told me it was a formality. My son hadn't asked me to help him. He'd already committed the house to someone before I ever picked up the pen. The signing wasn't an agreement. It was a ceremony for something that had already been decided. I looked at my grandson's drawing on the table. The crayon house with its TV rooms and its tidy garden. Then I looked at the document on my phone, with my son's signature, and a date that proved everything I'd feared and nothing I'd wanted to believe. I patted my grandchild's head. But in my head, the clock had already started ticking. I forwarded the scanned document to Nash without comment. He'd know what it meant. A commitment signed 3 weeks before my guarantee proved. Tyler hadn't stumbled into this. He'd walked in with the plan already built. I saved the anonymous number in my phone, under a name I'd understand later, Mechanic 2. Then I went to work. At 1 in the morning, with Tyler and Amber asleep upstairs, I unscrewed the back of Doreen's old kitchen radio, with a penlight between my teeth. The radio hadn't worked since 2019, but I kept it on the counter because Doreen bought it at a flea market in Hamtramck the week we got engaged. Nobody touched it. Nobody noticed it. That made it perfect. I wired a recording device into the radio's housing in 14 minutes. The device was the size of a Domino voice-activated 60 hours of storage, purchased with cash from an electronics shop on Gratiot Avenue. I soldered 2 connections, sealed the casing, and screwed the back panel on without leaving a mark. A diesel engine has 4,000 moving parts. A recording device has 12. This was the easiest repair I ever made. Night 2. I did the wall clock in the hallway. Night 3, 2 outlet plates, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the living room. I worked in socks on hardwood, moving through my own house like a man who knew every creak in every board because I did. 30 years of midnight trips to the bathroom had mapped every loose nail and settling joint in this floor. The second outlet plate gave me pause. I removed the cover and found the wiring had already been disturbed. Not by an electrician, the screws were hand-turned, not drill set, and one of them was a different gauge than the other 3. Someone had opened this plate before me. Recently, inside, wedged against the junction box, was a device I hadn't installed. Smaller than mine. Black casing, no brand markings, but stamped on the underside was a serial number prefix I recognized. GIS 400. Garrick Industrial Supply. I'd ordered parts from Garrick for 20 years before they went under. Whoever planted this device had access to industrial supply chains, the kind of access that came from working in a factory or running one. I left the device where it was. I installed mine beside it. Now the house had 2 listeners, and I knew about both of them. Doreen would have hated this. Microphones hidden in her radio, her clock, her walls. But Doreen never had her skillet thrown in a box. She never woke up to a combination lock on her own pantry. She never saw her grandson draw a picture of the building where they planned to put her husband. A house wired to listen is just an engine with a different kind of timing belt. Every signal routed, every circuit closed, every sound, a spark waiting to fire. By the 3rd night, my house was running on a frequency that Tyler and Amber couldn't hear, and every careless word they spoke from that point forward would be stored in a place they'd never think to look. That weekend, Ren and Leo came by. We sat on the back porch with coffee while December turned the air into something you could see. The backyard was gray and bare. The neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. Leo set his cup on the railing and looked at me the way a man looks when he's about to say something he's been rehearsing. "Mr. Holbrook, I need to tell you something about my father." His hands were steady, but his left knee bounced against the porch rail, the tell of a man working up to honesty. "My father lost 11 months of his life to the Vances," Leo said. 10 years ago, he brought a fraud case against them. They didn't fight it on the merits. They buried him in procedural motions until his retainer ran dry. Filed continuance after continuance. By the time the court dismissed, his firm was nearly bankrupt and his reputation was damaged. "He's not doing this for charity." Ren watched me. She already knew this. I could see it in how still she sat. "What was the fraud case about?" I asked. Leo paused. His knee stopped bouncing. "A forged deed transfer," he said. "The Vances took a commercial property from a retired business owner using a contract that looked like a loan guarantee. Sound familiar? It sounded like a blueprint. The same method, the same mechanism applied to a different target 10 years earlier. The Vances hadn't invented this scheme for me. They'd rehearsed it. "Leo didn't have to tell you any of this, Dad," Ren said quietly. That should count for something. She was right. A man who confesses his father's motives before you ask is either very honest or very strategic. I looked at Leo's face, the careful posture, the steady hands, the knee that had finally stopped moving, and I decided he was both. That was fine. I could work with both. I reached across the railing and shook his hand. His palm was smooth against my calluses, law student skin against mechanic's leather. Two different kinds of grip, both firm. In mechanics, no one works for free, I said. I understand that. They left at 4. I watched the car turn the corner, then went back inside. I pulled the outlet plate off the kitchen wall and looked at the device I hadn't installed. The Garrick serial prefix, GIS 400. I turned it over in my fingers. The casing was warm, it had been running. Someone had been listening to this house before I decided to listen. Someone with factory connections, industrial tools, and a reason to care about what happened inside these walls. Ally or enemy I didn't know yet, but I knew the serial number, and I knew where Garrick Industrial used to operate before they went bankrupt. And I knew the kind of person who kept old supply chain parts, the way I kept old gaskets out of habit, out of precision, out of a life spent working with machines that don't forgive mistakes. I put the plate back and washed my hands. The house was listening. All of it. The question was, who else was listening with me? I left the Garrick device in the wall. Removing it would tell whoever planted it that I knew. Leaving it meant two things: they'd keep listening, and I'd keep learning. A mechanic doesn't pull a leaking gasket until he knows where the oil is going. 3 days later, I found out where the oil was going. I spotted the black sedan at 7 in the morning. Parked 2 houses down, exhaust curling white in the freezing December air. No one on this block drives anything that clean. The cars on Werner Highway are 10 years old at best, rust-kissed and road-salted survivors of Michigan winters. This sedan was black-waxed and idling like it had somewhere better to be. I watched from the kitchen window, standing far enough back that the curtain hid me but close enough to read the parking sticker on the windshield. Blue and white. Eastern Industrial Park. The same complex where my machine shop had operated for 35 years. The same supply chain that stamped GIS 400 on the device in my wall. The driver's door opened. Benny Farrell stepped out like a man who'd done this before. Broad-shouldered, late 40s, wearing an overcoat that cost more than my monthly heating bill and shoes that had never touched a shop floor. He walked with the measured pace of someone used to delivering threats without raising his voice, chin, level hands, visible every step, deliberate. He came up the front walk. I met him at the door before he could knock. Mr. Holbrook. He didn't offer his hand. My name is Benny Farrell. I'm here as a courtesy. A courtesy, I repeated. I leaned against the door frame and let my voice go soft. That's nice. What kind of courtesy? The Vance Group likes things settled quietly. Your son understands the timeline. We just want to make sure you do too. I squinted at him. I scratched my head. I gave him the face of an old man trying to follow a conversation that was moving too fast. Timeline, I said. Son, I can barely remember what day the trash goes out. Benny studied me. His eyes were sharp but tired, the eyes of a man who'd been doing this work long enough to recognize a performance but too worn down to call it out. He reached into his coat and produced a business card. Plain white. No logo. Just a name and a phone number. January 15th, he said. That's the date that matters. Everything else is just weather. I took the card. I held it close to my face like I was struggling to read the print. But what I was really reading was Benny Farrell himself. Every engine has a bearing that's about to fail. It doesn't scream. It just runs a half-degree hotter than the rest, and only the mechanic who's listening can hear the difference. Benny Farrell was running hot. When he said the words Vance Group, his jaw tightened. Not with authority, not with pride, with resentment. The muscles in his neck shifted the way muscles shift when a man is swallowing something he doesn't want to taste. He wasn't delivering this message because he believed in it. He was delivering it because someone was making him. Well, I appreciate you coming by, I said, shuffling backward. You tell the Vance people I'll think about it. My thinking's a little slow these days. Benny nodded once. He turned and walked back to the sedan without looking at the house again. Professional, controlled, but not loyal. I went to the garage and watched through the window. Benny sat in the driver's seat with the engine running. He made a phone call. Through the windshield, I could see his posture change, shoulders up, neck stiff, one fist gripping the steering wheel at 12 o'clock. The body language of a man on a short leash. I've seen foremen talk to factory owners like that. Chin down, voice flat, agreeing to things they'd rather spit on the floor than swallow. That's not loyalty. That's servitude with a paycheck. What kind of enforcer punches the dashboard after talking to the man who signs his checks? Because that's exactly what Benny did. The call ended. His fist hit the dashboard hard enough that I saw the rearview mirror shake. He sat there for 10 seconds, breathing. Then he pulled out a second phone. Not the one he'd just used, a different one, smaller, from his inside jacket pocket. A personal phone. He dialed a number and held it to his ear, and when whoever answered picked up, his face changed. The tension in his jaw released. His shoulders dropped. He looked for just a moment like a man calling someone he actually trusted. 2 phones, 2 conversations, 2 versions of Benny Farrell. I've spent my life around men who work under bosses they can't stand. I know the difference between a man who follows orders and a man who endures them. Benny Farrell was enduring. Whatever the Vances had on him, it wasn't respect. It was leverage. And leverage, by definition, is a pressure point, which means it can be pressed from more than one direction. People don't look at the boss like that. Unless he's not just a debt collector. Benny pulled away from the curb. I watched the sedan roll past my driveway, and as it passed, I caught the last 3 digits of the license plate. 742. Fleet format. The same numbering system Garrick Industrial Supply used on their company vehicles before the bankruptcy. Garrick Industrial, the company that went under the same year Nash lost his case against the Vances. The same serial prefix stamped on the device in my wall. And now the same fleet numbers on the car of the man the Vances had sent to threaten me. 2 dead ends pointing at the same grave. I went inside and wrote the plate number on the back of Benny's business card. Then I put the card in my filing cabinet behind the photocopies and the email printouts, and I started thinking about how a man with 2 phones and a punched dashboard might be the most useful tool in my entire workshop. I brought the plate number and the Garrick serial to Nash's office that Wednesday night. He poured 2 whiskeys before I finished talking. The second one was for himself, and he drank it in one swallow. Nash Prescott's office smelled like old paper and fresh whiskey, the combination of a man who'd been waiting 10 years for a second chance. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the only glow on the block at that hour. Wren sat in the corner chair. Leo stood by the window with his arms folded, watching his father the way sons watch fathers when the past is about to come back into the room. Garrick Industrial didn't just go bankrupt, Nash said. He set his glass down on a ring stain that had been there so long it was part of the desk. The Vance Group liquidated them, bought their debt, forced the sale, stripped the assets. Garrick's owner was a man named Dale Whitford, retired machinist, owned the building and the equipment outright. The Vances used the same playbook. Loan guarantee, forged transfer, 90-day clock. By the time Dale realized what happened, the building was gone, and the Vances had flipped it to a developer for 3 times what they paid. And Benny, I asked. Benny Farrell was Garrick's floor manager. He lost his job when the company folded. My guess, and it's more than a guess now, is that the Vances kept him on as an asset. A man who knows industrial operations, knows the supply chain, knows how to move quietly through buildings and systems. They didn't just take his livelihood, they turned him into a tool. The room was quiet, except for the fluorescent hum. I looked at Nash, then at Leo, then at Wren. 4 people in a room planning to take down a family that had crushed better men than us, and the oldest one in the room was the only one not afraid. Nash laid out the strategy. 3 steps. First, let the recording devices gather evidence of fraud. Amber's phone calls, Tyler's conversations, anything that proved the transfer was orchestrated. Second, investigate Benny's connection to the old Vance lawsuit through the Garrick Trail, building a pattern of repeated deed theft. Third, draft a counter-contract that would void the forged deed and restore my ownership before the January deadline. 3 steps, Nash said. Evidence exposure reversal. We miss one, the whole thing collapses. Step 2 is Benny, I said. He's not loyal to the Vances. I saw it. A man on a leash bites when you cut the strap. Leo glanced at Wren. I caught the look. He leaned close to her and said something I wasn't meant to hear, but I heard it anyway. Your father doesn't need a lawyer. He needs a crew. Wren didn't smile, but she didn't disagree. We finished at 10. I drove home through streets that were already icing over the kind of December cold that settles into Detroit like it owns the place. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the hallway light. Amber was waiting. She stood in the hallway with a glossy brochure in her hand, leaning against the wall, the way people lean when they're trying to look casual about something they've been planning for weeks. Her slippers matched the hallway rug. Everything about her always matched, coordinated, deliberate, controlled. Dad, can I talk to you for a minute? She handed me the brochure. The cover showed a building surrounded by manicured grass, mature trees, and a flagpole. The headline read, Pineview Senior Residence. Below it, in smaller type, Northern Michigan's premier retirement community, gardens and activities. That's what they say when they mean locked doors and plastic furniture and a window facing nothing you ever built. 300 kilometers from Detroit, from my workshop, from the street where Doreen and I raised our children. Far enough that Sunday visits become monthly visits, become phone calls, become silence. We just want you comfortable, Amber said. Her voice was soft, rehearsed, the same tone she used when explaining the coffee machine. Tyler and I found a place with gardens activities. You'd love it up there. 300 kilometers, I said. That's a long drive for Sunday visits. She didn't blink. We'd call every week. I took the brochure. I held it the way I hold documents now, carefully, as evidence, not as information. I told her I'd think about it. She nodded and went upstairs, her slippers whispering on the steps. In the kitchen alone, I turned the brochure over. On the back, in the lower right corner, someone had written a note in blue ink. Not Amber's handwriting, I knew hers from the chore schedule on the fridge. This was different, precise, practiced, the penmanship of someone who fills out forms for a living. Unit reserve deposit paid November 15th. November 15th. I stood there holding that brochure, and I felt the dates connect like tumblers in a lock. Tyler's pre-commitment document, the one the anonymous texter had sent me, was dated 2 days before this deposit. They'd committed my house and booked my cage in the same week, before Amber ever handed me the guarantee, before Tyler ever said the word temporary, before any of it. The brochure smelled faintly of pine air freshener, the kind they pump through buildings where everything is new and nothing is personal. I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket, next to Benny's business card and the photocopied clause that had started all of this. 300 kilometers. Far from everything I've built. Far from the workshop where I read their documents at 5 in the morning. Far from the kitchen where my grandson drew a picture of the place they planned to warehouse me. They won't get it. Not the house, not the shop, not me. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark the way I'd been standing in the dark for weeks now. But the dark felt different tonight. It felt like cover. The coordinated dates changed something in me. The house, the nursing home, the pre-commitment all locked into the same week like pistons firing in sequence. This wasn't a family disagreement that got out of hand. This was an engine, and it had been built to run without me ever hearing it start. So I went to find the man who might know where the ignition switch was. The diner had 12 tables, and Benny Farrell was sitting at the one closest to the back exit, the habit of a man who always plans his way out. A worker's diner in Hamtramck, the kind of place where the coffee comes in ceramic mugs that haven't been white since the 90s, and the eggs arrive before you finish ordering. Gray December light filtered through a grease-filmed window. Benny had a plate he hadn't touched, and a cup of black coffee he'd been staring at. I sat down across from him without being invited. "I'm not here to threaten you," I said. "I'm here because you punch the dashboard after every call with the Vances, and a man like that is looking for a door." Benny's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of machinery that just did something it wasn't supposed to do. "You've been watching me," he said. "An old man with a bugged house and a grudge. I underestimated you. Most people do. That's the only advantage I've got left." He was quiet for a long time. The short order bell rang twice. A waitress carried plates past us without looking down. Between us, the coffee sat untouched and getting cold. The device in your outlet plate," Benny said finally. "That was mine. I didn't react. I'd suspected it since the Garrick serial number, but hearing it confirmed was different. I planted it 4 months before you even knew you were a target," he continued. "The Vances sent me in to monitor the house layout habits, who comes and goes, but I started recording their calls too. Not for them. For me. Insurance," I said. "Survival. The Vances don't retire people, Mr. Holbrook. They use them until there's nothing left, and then they bury what's left under paperwork. I watched them do it to the man who owned Garrick Industrial. I'm not going to let them do it to me. Recruiting a man like Benny is like loosening a bolt on someone else's engine. Useful, but you'd better know which direction the torque is going." He could be telling the truth. He could also be telling me exactly what I wanted to hear, because the Vances had told him to. But I looked at his hands on the table. Steady. Not the tremor I'd seen through the windshield during those phone calls. This was a man who'd made a decision and was sitting in the relief of it. "I have a lawyer," I said. "Nash Prescott. He lost a case to the Vances 10 years ago. He's been waiting for a second chance. If you bring him what you've gathered, the recordings, the internal documents, whatever you've been hoarding, he'll help clear your name. In exchange, you help us build a fraud case that sticks." Benny stared at me for 10 seconds. Then he did something I didn't expect. He almost smiled. "You're not what they said you were," he said. "What did they say I was?" "Old, confused, easy." I picked up my coffee for the first time. It was cold and bitter, and I drank it anyway. "Deal," I said. He nodded. One nod. The kind that doesn't need a handshake because the weight of it is enough. I drove home with the windows down despite the cold. I needed the air. Something had shifted, not just in the strategy, but in the balance. For the first time since Tyler slid that envelope across the Christmas table, I wasn't playing defense. I pulled into the driveway at 2 in the afternoon and went straight to the workshop. The garage was cold, the air carrying sawdust and motor oil, the smell of every winter I'd spent in this house. I sat on my workbench stool and looked through the window at the front yard, and that's when I saw Hank. Hank Stanton was standing on my front porch talking to Amber. She held the storm door open with one hand and passed him a white envelope with the other. He took it the way you take something you've been expecting. No surprise, no hesitation, just a practiced exchange between two people who'd done this before. Hank used to bring over corn from his garden every August. 12 ears, still warm from the sun, wrapped in a grocery bag with my name written on it in marker. He brought it every year for 10 years. And now he was standing on my porch, collecting an envelope from the woman who was trying to put me in a home 300 kilometers away. I raised my phone and recorded the exchange. Steady hands, good angle. 10 seconds of video that captured Hank's face, Amber's hand, and the envelope passing between them. Hank left without looking toward the garage. Amber closed the door. I replayed the video. I zoomed in on the envelope in Hank's hand. It wasn't sealed. The flap was tucked, not glued, and in the freeze frame I could see the corner of a document inside. A letterhead I recognized from the brochure in my jacket pocket. Pineview Senior Residence. I zoomed closer. The first printed line below the letterhead was small but legible on my screen. Physician's Statement of Incapacity Patient Vernon A. Holbrook. They weren't just planning to send me to a nursing home. They were building a medical case to have me declared incompetent. That's why the senile act had been so easy for them to believe, because they needed to believe it. Every stumble, every repeated question, every time I called the microwave the box, they'd been writing it all down. And now a doctor I'd never met was going to sign a form saying I couldn't manage my own affairs. Another piece. But this piece I haven't decided how to use it yet. The incapacity statement changed the rules. Until that moment, I was fighting to keep my house. Now I was fighting to keep my autonomy, my right to sign my own checks, make my own decisions, walk out my own front door without someone's permission. A physician I'd never met was preparing to sign a form that would reduce me from a person to a patient. And every stumble I'd performed, every confused look I'd rehearsed, was being written down as evidence that I'd already lost my mind. So I leaned into it harder. How many times do you have to call your own coffee mug that thing before the woman stealing your house stops watching what she says around you? The answer, it turns out, is about a week. January arrived cold and gray, the way January always arrives in Detroit, like a bill collector who doesn't care if you're ready. I escalated the performance. I shuffled slower through the hallway. I asked Amber what day it was at breakfast, then asked again 20 minutes later, then asked a third time while she was on the phone. I called the microwave the box. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and pretended not to recognize the toothbrush holder. Amber, honey, what's the thing you heat soup in called again? She didn't even look up from her phone. The microwave, Dad. The hardest part of pretending to lose your mind is remembering exactly how much you've already pretended to forget. I kept a mental ledger which confusions I'd introduced on which days, which questions I'd repeated, and how many times. If the act was going to feed their incapacity case, I needed to control exactly what they documented. Real cognitive decline is erratic, unpredictable. My version was systematic. A mechanic's decline, every misfire precisely timed. And it was working. I overheard Amber on the phone with Tyler one morning while I sat in the living room pretending to doze. He asked me what a microwave was today. Twice. This is going to be easier than we thought. Easier. That word sat in my chest, like a shard of glass. But I kept my eyes closed and my breathing slow, and I let her believe what she needed to believe. By the second week of January, Amber stopped leaving the room for phone calls. She stopped lowering her voice. She stopped closing the kitchen door when the conversations turned to numbers and names and timelines. I had become furniture, a piece of the house she was taking. No more threatening than the couch or the clock on the wall. There's a particular kind of loneliness in standing in your own kitchen, pretending not to know the name of the stove your wife cooked 40 years of Thanksgivings on. You do it because the plan requires it. But the plan doesn't require you to feel nothing. And I felt everything. The call came on a Wednesday morning. Amber was at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone when it rang. She answered on speaker without hesitation. I was 6 feet away, pouring instant coffee, the bitter pods she'd replaced my grounds with, and my hands trembled just enough to be convincing. The voice on the speaker was male, older, authoritative. Amber's father. "Where are we on the additional paperwork?" he asked. "Almost done," Amber said. "Tyler's handling the signatures this week." Said, "Good. Now listen. Once the factory transfers with the house, we liquidate the equipment first. That's where the real margin is. The lathes, the presses, industrial equipment in that corridor is worth more than the building." She didn't even mute the call. That's how invisible I'd become in my own house. He doesn't even know the shop's on the deed," Amber said. He thinks it's just the house. I stirred my coffee. I let the spoon clink against the ceramic. I breathed. The machine shop. My shop near Eastern Market. The one I'd sold years ago, or thought I had. The one whose title transfer had never properly filed. They'd found it somehow, and they'd quietly added it to the deed transfer, and they were already calculating what the equipment inside was worth. I built that shop with Doreen's insurance money. Every lathe, every press, every bolt I installed with my own hands, over 3 decades of weekends and holidays. And they were pricing it from a kitchen counter, while I stood there pretending not to understand the word microwave. The call continued for another 2 minutes. Amber's father gave instructions about filing timelines and county clerk procedures. And then a third voice came through the speaker, quieter, farther from the phone, but distinct. And the physician's letter is that the same doctor, Amber's father, answered quickly, but I didn't hear the words. I was focused on the voice. It wasn't Tyler's. It wasn't anyone I'd heard on these calls before. Someone else was in the room with the Vances asking about the incapacity filing, asking about a doctor who was apparently already in their pocket. The call ended. Amber picked up her phone and walked out of the kitchen without looking at me. I stood there for a long time. The coffee cooled, the clock on the wall ticked, and inside it the recording device captured every tick alongside every word that had just been spoken. That night, I sat in the workshop and replayed the audio. I listened to the third voice 3 times. Male, mid-50s, maybe older. Professional cadence, the way doctors and lawyers speak when they're discussing cases instead of people. The Vances didn't just have Amber. They didn't just have Tyler. They had a physician willing to sign a document declaring me incompetent based on symptoms I was performing on purpose. A closed loop, the family reports the decline, the doctor confirms it, and the patient never gets to speak for himself, because by then, legally, his words don't count. They knew about the factory, but they didn't know what I knew about it. And they didn't know that every word they'd just spoken was sitting on a 60-hour voice-activated recording device hidden inside a clock my wife bought at a flea market in 1994. I turned off the workshop light and started planning the next move. I brought the recording to Nash the next day. He listened to the third voice twice, made a note I couldn't read, and said he'd look into it. But that wasn't why I'd come. I'd come to say 2 words I'd never spoken aloud in this fight. Machine shop. I'd carried the secret of that shop for 15 years, the way a man carries a loaded gun he hopes he'll never need. Safety on chamber full, always within reach. But the Vances had mentioned it on that call. They knew it existed, and they were already calculating what the equipment inside was worth, which meant the safety was off now, whether I liked it or not. Nash leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked. His office smelled like old case files and afternoon coffee that had gone cold in paper cups on the shelf behind him. "Tell me about the shop," he said. "I sold it in 2008 to a man named Garrett. Handshake deal, partial paperwork. He ran it for 4 years, then died in 2012. Heart attack at 61, no family, no will. Nobody ever came looking for the title. And the transfer, never properly filed. The deed sat in county records under my name. I found the gap 2 years after Garrett died when I was cleaning up some old tax paperwork. I could have corrected it. I didn't." Nash stopped writing. He looked at me over his glasses. "You left it on purpose. I never fully trusted the buyer. He paid in installments and missed the last 2. Leaving the title incomplete was my insurance. A mechanic doesn't hand over the keys until the bill is paid." Nash set his pen down. I could see him recalculating not just the legal strategy, but me. He was realizing that the confused old man his son's girlfriend's father had brought to his office wasn't confused at all. I'd been thinking like a strategist for 15 years before Tyler ever pulled into my driveway. "Vernon," Nash said slowly. "Do you know what that corridor is now?" "I know exactly what it is. That's why I'm telling you now and not before." He turned to his computer. The blue glow of the county assessor's database lit up his face. He typed in the parcel number I'd memorized years ago. The Detroit Tech Corridor redevelopment map loaded beside it, color-coded zones, bid boundaries, projected development timelines. My machine shop parcel sat dead center in the designated zone, outlined in red like a target. $820,000. That's not money. That's a number that makes lawyers sit up straighter and family members you haven't heard from in years suddenly remember your birthday. Nash's chair creaked again as he leaned forward. An $820,000, he said. You've been sitting on a fortune while they fight you over a house worth a third of that. The house is my home, I said. The shop is my insurance. There's a difference. My calloused thumb traced the edge of his mahogany desk. Two different kinds of wood, the desk polished and preserved the workbench in my garage scarred and stained. Both useful, both built to hold weight. Nash pulled up more records. Tax history, zoning changes, development applications. He scrolled through pages of municipal filings I'd never seen before. Here's the problem, he said. If the deed transfer on your house goes through any title search connected to your name, we'll surface the shop within a week. They'll find it. And once they find it, they'll move on it the same way they moved on the house paperwork pressure and a deadline you don't see coming. How do you explain to a man in a suit that a concrete floor where you once pressed engine blocks is worth more than the house where you raised your children? You don't explain it. You just accept that the world prices things differently than the people who built them. Can we protect it? I asked. We can file a reclamation claim, establish your continued ownership through the tax records and the incomplete transfer. But we need to do it before the house transfer finalizes. Once that domino falls, the rest follow. Nash kept scrolling. He'd moved from the assessor's database to a different screen, a list of development bids for the Tech Corridor parcels. 3 bidders. He read them in order. Bidder 1 was a national development firm I'd never heard of. Bidder 2 was the Vance Group. Nash said the name without emphasis, but I saw his jaw tighten the same way it always did when the Vances came up. Then he read Bidder 3. He read it twice. He took off his glasses and looked at me. Bidder 3 is a shell company called Verner Capital LLC, filed 6 months ago, registered to Tyler Holbrook. The room went quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Somewhere on Griswold Street, a truck downshifted, and the building vibrated. My son had filed a shell company. My son who'd told me he was broke, who'd moved into my house because he couldn't afford rent, who'd handed me a guarantee document and called it a formality, had registered a development company and entered a bid on the same tech corridor where my machine shop sat like an unclaimed prize. Tyler wasn't just helping the Vances take my house. He was running his own play. A separate game inside their game using the same pieces, but aiming at a different prize. The Vances wanted the house and the shop. Tyler wanted the corridor. I sat with that for a long time. Nash waited. He knew enough not to fill the silence. But if they get the house transferred, they'll find the shop, I said finally. And if Tyler's bidding on the corridor, he already knows it's there. That's why I have to act before Christmas. Nash nodded. He understood the timeline now. So did I. This wasn't a race against the Vances anymore. It was a race against my own son, who'd apparently been running farther and faster than any of us realized, and who'd filed the paperwork to prove it 6 months before I ever suspected a thing. Tyler's shell company kept me awake that night. Not the betrayal I'd made peace with that months ago. What kept me awake was the ambition. A man who files development paperwork in secret isn't desperate. He's calculating. And I'd spent 14 months thinking my son was one thing when he might have been something else entirely. I sat in my workshop at 11 o'clock with the lamp on and the door locked. The house was quiet. Tyler and Amber had gone to bed an hour ago. The furnace clicked. The walls settled. The way old walls settle slow pops and groans, the sounds of a house that's been standing longer than most marriages. The wooden box sat on the shelf where it had been for 7 years. It weighed less than a pound, but I'd carried it like it was made of lead. Doreen had given it to me 3 weeks before the cancer one. Hand-sanded walnut, the grain still smooth under my thumbs. She'd made it in this garage probably during the hours I was at the shop, probably while she was already sick and hadn't told me yet. "Open it when you need to remember who you are," she'd said. I'd never opened it. Not at her funeral. Not during the silent months after. Not when Tyler arrived with his truck. Not when I found the clause or the flyer or the incapacity form. I'd kept it sealed because I was afraid that whatever was inside would change something I wasn't ready to change. But I wasn't the same man who'd put it on that shelf. That man had a house and a pension and a quiet life. This man had recording devices in his walls and a lawyer working after hours and a son who'd registered a company to bid on land I hadn't told anyone about. I picked up the box. The cedar smell hit me the moment I lifted the lid, musty dry, the ghost of sawdust and varnish. Inside was a sealed envelope, cream-colored, addressed in Doreen's handwriting. Blue ink, faded cursive, the kind of penmanship they don't teach anymore. The envelope was addressed to Tyler. Not to me, to Tyler. I held it for a long time. The seal was old and brittle. It cracked when I slid my thumb under the flap, a small, dry sound like a leaf breaking. The letter was 2 pages. Doreen's handwriting filled both the lines, slanting slightly upward, the way they always did when she was writing something important. She used to say that happy letters lean right and sad letters lean left. This one leaned both ways. I read it. "Tyler, there are things I should have told you while I still had the courage. Your father, the man who raised you, knew the truth from the day you were born. He chose to stay because he loved you. Not because of obligation, not because of appearances, because he held you in the hospital the night you arrived, and he decided right then that biology is a fact, but fatherhood is a choice. He chose you. 42 years of choosing. Every school play, every scraped knee, every argument that ended with a slammed door and started again with breakfast on the table. Every time Tyler said, 'Dad,' and I answered without hesitation. Every time I looked at his face and saw features that didn't match mine and loved him anyway, not despite the difference, but through it, around it, over it, the way water moves past a stone without ever acknowledging the stone is there. Not once did the choosing feel like a burden, until right now." Doreen's letter continued. She wrote about a man she'd known before our marriage. A brief relationship ended before she and I met. She discovered the pregnancy after the wedding and made a decision she carried alone for 42 years. She wrote that she was sorry, not for Tyler, never for Tyler, but for the silence. "You want to know what love costs? It costs you the right to say, 'He's not really mine,' when he's breaking your heart. Because he is mine. He was mine the moment I held him. He was mine when he stood at the chain-link gate on his birthday. He was mine when he handed me that envelope on Christmas Eve. The blood doesn't change the choosing. Nothing changes the choosing." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Through the wall, Tyler coughed. A dry, sharp sound the way he'd coughed since he was a teenager with bad sinuses. My son. Through the wall. 10 feet away and a universe apart. I was about to close the box when I noticed something underneath where the letter had been. A photograph, face down, edges yellowed. I turned it over. A young man in a factory uniform. Early 20s, dark hair, square jaw, standing beside a sign I had to hold under the lamp to read. The sign said, "Vance Industrial Partners." And the face, the jawline, the set of the eyes, the way he held his shoulders, was Tyler's face. 30 years younger, wearing different clothes, standing in a different decade, but unmistakably the same architecture. Doreen had kept this photograph in the box with the letter. She'd wanted Tyler to see it. She'd wanted him to know where he came from, and she'd trusted me to decide when. The Vances hadn't found my family through Amber. Tyler's connection to them wasn't a coincidence of marriage. It was blood. The man in the photograph was Tyler's biological father, and he'd worked for or with the Vance family before Tyler was born. Before I was born into this fight. I put the photograph back. I closed the lid. I sat in the lamplight and listened to my son cough through the wall. Only a wall between us. And 7 years the letter remained unread. But now it was open. And the question it asked wasn't about the past. It was about what I was going to do with the truth, whether it was a weapon I could use or a wound I needed to protect, whether Tyler knew, and whether knowing would matter. I kept the photograph. I didn't show it to Nash. I didn't tell Wren. Some truths are weapons, and some truths are just wounds dressed up as information. Until I knew which one this was. It stayed in the box, but the world didn't wait for me to decide. Hank Stanton knocked on the workshop door at 6 in the morning. Nobody knocks on a man's door at 6 unless they're confessing or running. Hank was doing both. Morning light cut through the dusty workshop windows in slats. I opened the door and found Hank standing there with a face like a man attending his own funeral. He carried a manila folder under one arm and the smell of cheap aftershave and old guilt. "I need to talk to you," he said. "Come in." He sat on the stool by my workbench and set the folder down. His hands were shaking the way Tyler's hands had shaken the day I signed the guarantee, not from cold, but from the weight of what he was about to say. 6 months, Hank said. "She paid me $400 a week to write down when you left the house and who came by, what time you woke up, whether you seemed confused, whether you repeated yourself. I wrote it all down and handed it to her every Friday in an envelope." He slid the folder across the workbench. Inside were photocopies of every report he'd sent, dates, times, observations, all in Hank's careful carpenter's handwriting. And clipped to the back, receipts, cash payments $400 each, documented with the precision of a man who knew he might need to prove where the money came from someday. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I already knew Hank. I filmed you taking the envelope in December." His face went slack. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "Because I needed you to choose." He stared at the workbench. I let the silence do its work. "What changed?" I asked. "Last month. Wren came by for dinner. Tyler got loud about something money, the paperwork, I don't know. He shoved her. Not hard, but hard enough. She hit the doorframe with her shoulder. Nobody said anything. Amber looked at her phone. And I stood there on my porch watching through the window, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. Not for $400 a week. Not for $4,000. Hank rebuilt my back porch in the summer of 2016. Wouldn't take $1, just asked for 2 beers and a Tigers game on the radio. We sat out there until the mosquitoes drove us inside, talking about nothing important the way men do when the important things are too heavy to lift. And now here he was handing me receipts for selling me out at $400 a week. I looked through the reports. Amber had been documenting my senile act word for word. Every time I called the microwave the box, every repeated question, every confused shuffle, it was all in Hank's reports, transcribed in neat columns. My own performance, the one I'd built to make them careless, was the primary evidence in their incapacity filing. I'd given them exactly what they needed to have me declared incompetent. "These reports," I said. "She's using them for the doctor." Hank nodded. "She told me it was for insurance purposes." I knew it wasn't. I closed the folder. I looked at Hank for a long time. Then I told him to go home and wait. That weekend, I drove to the Hamtramck diner. Benny was at the same table, back exit, same seat, same tired eyes. But something had shifted since our last meeting. He looked lighter. The leash was already fraying. A USB drive the size of a thumb sat on the table between us. Funny how the smallest tools can dismantle the biggest machines. "Everything's on here," Benny said. The diner booth vinyl creaked under his weight as he leaned forward. 10 years of their books. Dummy contracts. The Garrick industrial file. The original evidence your lawyer lost a decade ago. They didn't destroy it. They just moved it. Nash will know what to do with it. And what do you need in return? I need Nash to keep me out of prison, and I need to disappear after. I picked up the USB. It was cold between my fingers, cold, plastic, warm data. Years of crimes compressed into something I could close my fist around. Deal, I said. Benny stood. He buttoned his coat. Then he looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from him before. Not resentment, not calculation, but something closer to recognition. You remind me of my father, he said. I didn't know if it was a compliment or an apology. I nodded anyway. He walked out through the back exit the way he always did. That night, I plugged the USB into Nash's computer. The files were organized by year 10 folders, one for each year the Vances had been operating. Nash opened the most recent one first, scanning file names, checking dates. Then he found a folder labeled Holbrook. He clicked it open. Inside were 47 files, photographs mostly. My house from different angles, the machine shop near Eastern Market, my truck in the hardware store parking lot, my daily route mapped on a satellite image with timestamps. The files were dated 18 months before Tyler moved in, 18 months before the guarantee, before the envelope, before any of it. The Vances hadn't responded to an opportunity when Tyler came to them for help. They'd created the opportunity. They'd surveilled me, mapped my assets, and then sent Tyler and Amber in like contractors on a demolition job. The last photograph in the folder stopped me. It was taken from inside a kitchen, Hank's kitchen, judging by the curtains looking through the window at my front yard. The Vances had been using Hank's sightline before Hank ever knew he was being paid. I closed the laptop. Nash was quiet. Christmas, I said. We move on Christmas Eve. Nash spent the next 2 months building the case from Benny's USB. The surveillance dossier, the Garrick connection, the forged transfers, all of it threaded into a legal strategy timed to detonate on one specific date. By November, we were ready. I signed my name 3 times that morning, each signature a trap dressed as surrender. Nash's office was cold. He'd opened the window, despite the November chill, something about keeping his head clear for document work. A notary named Ruth Bellamy waited in the hallway, a gray-haired woman with bifocals who stamped papers the way I torqued bolts, firm, precise, final. 3 documents sat on the desk. The first was a counter-contract, voiding the original guarantee on the grounds of fraudulent inducement. The second was a clause I'd asked Nash to draft personally, one that redirected Tyler's outstanding bad debt back onto him if the transfer was ever enacted. The third was a reclamation claim on the machine shop parcel establishing my continued ownership through county tax records and the incomplete title transfer. Nash explained the timing. The filings would process electronically through the county system. He'd timed them so the counter-contracts would activate on December 24th. Christmas Eve, Nash said. They'll get served the same day the original guarantee was supposed to finalize. Poetic if you're into that sort of thing. No, that's when Tyler brought me the first envelope, I said. Feels right. Wren sat in the corner chair, the same one she'd sat in the first time we came to this office. She watched me sign the first document, then the second. When I picked up the pen for the third, the debt clause, she spoke. Dad, are you sure about that one? That's Tyler's life you're redirecting. It was always his debt, Wren. I'm just giving it back. She didn't argue. She witnessed the signatures. Ruth Bellamy came in, stamped each page, and the electronic filing confirmation chimed on Nash's screen 3 times. 3 quiet tones. 3 traps set. 3 signatures that morning, 1 to save my house, 1 to reclaim my shop, and 1 to make sure my son feels the weight of every dollar he tried to take from me. Before I tell you what happened next, before I show you how Amber played her last card. That same evening. Are you still with me? Comment whether you think Tyler deserves what's coming, and add one reason why. Please note the next part includes some dramatized details added for emotional impact. The message underneath is what matters. That evening, I drove home to find Amber waiting at the kitchen table with a fresh stack of documents and 2 cups of coffee. One for her, one for me. The coffee was still hot, which meant she'd been timing my arrival. "Dad, I need you to look at these," she said. "It's the final paperwork. Once you sign, everything's settled and we can all move forward." She pushed the stack across the table. I picked it up slowly. Let the pages sag in my hands like they were too heavy. I squinted at the first paragraph, the way I'd been squinting at everything for months. "Now what's this word here?" I said, tapping the middle of page 2. "Indemnification. That's a big word. Can you explain it to me, sweetheart?" Amber explained it. I asked her to explain it again. I turned to page 3 and asked about hereinafter. I turned back to page 1 and asked if I'd already read this part. 20 minutes on page 2. Amber's patience frayed one thread at a time. Tyler appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. Amber leaned toward him and whispered something she thought I couldn't hear. "He's been on page 2 for 20 minutes. This old man is too slow." Amber called me slow, 6 feet from 3 recording devices and 1 notarized counter-contract that would bury her by Christmas. I kept reading. I kept squinting. I let my finger trace the lines the way a child traces words in a picture book. And while I performed, I read the actual content with the precision of a man who'd spent 35 years reading technical manuals written to confuse. Page 3 was the waiver. Standard language: I, the undersigned, relinquish all legal claims to the property. Page 4 was more of the same. Then I turned to page 5. Amber hadn't mentioned page 5. She'd called it final paperwork and pointed to 3 signature tabs, but there were 4 pages with tabs. The 4th page, 5, was different. The heading read, Power of Attorney Medical and Financial Decisions. Below it, a single line designated Tyler Holbrook as sole decision-maker for all medical and financial matters pertaining to my care. Beneath that, a signature line with my name pre-printed. If I signed this page, Tyler would have legal authority over my medical decisions, combined with the incapacity filing Amber had been building through Hank's reports and the complicit physician. This document would make the commitment irreversible. I wouldn't just lose my house. I'd lose my right to fight back, my right to hire a lawyer, my right to say no. They weren't just taking my property. They were taking my voice. I set the pen down. I looked up at Amber with the most confused, gentle, harmless expression I'd perfected over 12 months of practice. "I think I need to finish reading this tomorrow," I said. "My eyes are tired tonight." Amber's jaw tightened. Tyler shifted in the doorway. But what could they do? Rush the old man, grab his hand, and force the pen? They needed the signature to be voluntary. That was the one thing they couldn't fake. "Sure, Dad," Amber said. "Take your time." I shuffled down the hallway to my bedroom. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and smiled in the dark for the first time in months. Slow. That's exactly what I want them to think. Christmas Eve morning came in cold and still. I was at the kitchen table by 6, coffee going bitter in my mug, running through the day's sequence one more time. Nash would file the USB evidence with the state regulatory office and the Wayne County prosecutor at 3 o'clock sharp. By 4, Garrison and Lorraine Vance would know their empire had a crack running straight through the foundation. By dinner, the whole thing would be over. That was the plan. Wren let herself in through the side door at 7:15. She had flour on her collar. Bakery shift started at 4, and she was carrying a paper bag that she set on the counter without opening. Her eyes were red, but not from crying, from holding something in. "Dad," she said. She never called me Dad unless the words behind it were heavy. I pushed my chair back. Sit down. I'm pregnant. The kitchen clock ticked 3 times before I could move. She stood there with her hands flat on the counter, flour dust on her knuckles, waiting for whatever my face decided to do. Leo's baby. My grandchild. A life I hadn't factored into a single one of the 18 documents Nash had ready to file. How far along? My voice came out steadier than I expected. 7 weeks. I found out yesterday. Leo knows. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. I wasn't going to tell you today, but I can't sit at that table tonight pretending everything is normal when everything is. She waved at the air between us. I stood up and put my arms around her. She smelled like sourdough and cold wind. For 10 seconds, I let myself be nothing but a father holding his daughter. Then I let go and sat back down. The plan stays, I said. Dad, shuckin' the plan stays Ren, but I'm adding a line. I pulled the notepad toward me and wrote a number. $40,000, the last of Doreen's life insurance money, sitting in a credit union account Tyler didn't know existed. This goes into a trust. Today. For the baby. No matter what happens tonight, that money is untouchable. She looked at the number. She looked at me. She sat down. You ever watch somebody get news that rearranges the bones in their face? I have. Twice in one morning. The first was Ren, when I told her everything I'd built over the last 2 months. The recordings, the counter-contracts, Benny's defection, Hank's switched loyalty. The USB drive now sitting in Nash Prescott's office safe. Her mouth opened and closed 3 times. Then she said, "You old fox, kumkum," and laughed until she cried. The second happened 4 miles away, and I didn't see it. But Nash told me every detail later, and I'll give it to you the way he gave it to me. At 3 o'clock, Nash Prescott walked into the Wayne County Prosecutor's office with a USB drive, 14 printed pages of annotated evidence, and a cover letter referencing 3 state statutes. He walked out 11 minutes later. By 3:20, he had filed a parallel complaint with the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. By 3:30, the phone calls had started. Garrison Vance was in the back office of his pawn shop on Gratiot Avenue when his lawyer called. Garrison is the kind of man who wears a signet ring he never stops turning broad-shouldered. Golfer's Tane, a voice built, for telling people what their grandmother's jewelry is actually worth. He'd spent 40 years buying low and selling high, and he'd applied that same principle to real estate, to shell companies, to his daughter's marriage. Lorraine sat across from him, salon-perfect silver hair, reading glasses on a pearl chain. The kind of woman who tracks every dollar in a leather-bound ledger and calls it household management. The lawyer's name was the first thing that should have told me something. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Garrison listened for 90 seconds, then hung up. He turned the signet ring twice. He told Lorraine they would not be attending Christmas Eve dinner at Tyler's house. He picked up the phone again and called a different number, a number he kept in his wallet, not in his contacts. Back on Garfield Street. I didn't know any of this yet. I was wrapping Cohen's present, a model diesel engine, the kind with transparent cylinder walls, so you can watch the pistons cycle. I tied the bow and set it under the tree that Amber had decorated, without asking whether I wanted tinsel or lights. Tinsel. Doreen always chose lights. My phone buzzed at 3:47 p.m. Nash filed, they know. I read those 3 words 4 times. Then I set the phone face down on the workbench and let the air out of my chest. 14 months of work. 63 years of trusting people who shared my blood or my name. It all came down to a 3-word text on a Tuesday afternoon the day before Christmas. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened next. Every move I made from this point cost me something I couldn't get back. I picked up the phone again because Nash was typing. The second message arrived at 3:49. Vance's retained emergency counsel. Name is Caldwell. I stared at the screen. Caldwell. The name hit my ears before my brain caught up, and then my brain caught up hard. I grabbed the laptop, pulled up the recording from the speakerphone call, the one where Tyler and Amber talked to the Vances about liquidating factory equipment. 3 voices. Tyler, Amber, and a third. The one I couldn't identify, the one who asked about the physician's statement. I had played that recording 19 times. I had described the third voice to Nash, to Benny, to Hank. Male, mid-50s, careful diction, a habit of clearing his throat before dollar amounts. Caldwell, the Vance's emergency attorney, wasn't some stranger pulled from a Rolodex. He was already inside the conspiracy. He'd been advising them from the beginning, guiding Tyler's paperwork, shaping the incapacity strategy, whispering dollar figures through a speakerphone while my son and his wife nodded along. The trap Nash had just sprung, Caldwell already knew every piece of it. Because he'd been sitting on the other side of the table the entire time wearing a different hat. I set the phone down. I picked up the wrapping paper, and I started wrapping the next gift. Because in 6 hours, every person in this story was going to sit at the same table, and I needed my hands to stop shaking before then. 7 plates, 7 napkins, 7 glasses of cider, and 2 chairs that stayed empty all through grace. I carved the ham at the head of my own table, same spot I'd sat for 31 Christmases, and I watched Amber's eyes drift to her parents' empty chairs every time she thought nobody was looking. Tyler called Garrison's cell 3 times between the salad and the main course. Voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. Each time he set the phone down a little harder. Something's wrong, Tyler said. Mom and Dad never miss Christmas. Amber cut into her ham without looking up. Just eat. They'll call back. But her hands shook when she used the knife. She already knew something was wrong. She just didn't know how wrong. I passed the rolls to Cohen and asked him about school. He told me about a science project involving magnets, and I listened like it was the most important thing in the world, because right then, for him it was. Wren sat across from me, eating slowly, her left hand resting on her stomach in a way that was new. Nobody else noticed. Amber's phone buzzed against the tablecloth at 7:30. She tilted the screen toward her lap, but the dining room window behind her was black with December night, and glass is a mirror when the light is right. I saw the reflection. Not every word, but enough. Garrison's name at the top, and below it 1 line I could read clearly. Lawyer says don't go. Amber locked the screen and set the phone face down. The color left her cheeks in stages, pink to pale to something close to gray. She smiled at Cohen and told him to finish his green beans. I ate my ham. Did I ever tell you about the Christmas the pipes froze? I said to Cohen. He shook his head, mouth full of roll. 1978. Your grandmother and I had been married 2 years. The pipes froze at 3 in the morning, and the kitchen was an ice rink by dawn. Your grandmother, she didn't panic. She carried the stock pot into the workshop, set it on the kerosene heater, and made tomato soup. We ate it sitting on oil drums with snow blowing under the garage door. I smiled. Best soup I ever had. Cohen laughed. Tyler didn't. Amber stared at her plate. Cohen said grace that night, thanked God for Grandpa's house and the big tree and the cookies Wren had brought from the bakery, and I sat there with my hands folded, knowing I was about to blow his world apart the minute he fell asleep. Wren cleared the dishes. Amber put Cohen to bed at 8:40, and I heard her reading him a story about a bear who lost his mittens. Her voice through the ceiling was soft and careful, and for one breath I thought about stopping. About letting the whole thing slide into January, into February, into never. Then I remembered the nursing home brochure, 300 kilometers from Detroit, and the deposit note with my name on it dated before anyone asked my opinion. The breath passed. Tyler waited until Amber came back downstairs. The four of us sat at the table, cleared, now candles burning, low cedar smell from the tree, mixing with cooling grease on the serving platter. Tyler reached into the folder he'd brought and slid the envelope across the table. The ownership transfer. One more time. Dad, just sign it. It's Christmas. Let's be done. I looked at the envelope. I looked at my son. 42 years old, jawline going soft circles under his eyes that hadn't been there in October. Whatever the Vances had promised him, it was eating him from the inside. "What, we are done," I said. "Just not the way you planned." I reached under my chair and brought up 2 envelopes of my own. I set them side by side in front of Tyler's. The first was the counter-contract filing recorded with Wayne County 6 hours ago. The second was the updated property record showing my name restored as sole owner of every parcel Tyler thought he'd taken. Tyler opened the first envelope, read 3 lines, stopped. Amber reached for the second. I let her. The sound of Amber's own voice coming out of that laptop hit the room like a car wreck. Everyone heard it. Nobody moved. I had opened the laptop while they were reading. 1 click. The kitchen recording volume at 60%, enough to fill a dining room, not enough to wake a boy sleeping upstairs. Amber's voice, tinny through the laptop speaker, talking about the factory equipment, the deed, the shop I'd built with 40 years of grease under my fingernails. Every word she thought had been spoken in private, now playing back between the candlesticks and the leftover cranberry sauce. Amber's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Wren sat perfectly still, hands in her lap. I watched Tyler. I had planned for anger. I had planned for denial, for shouting for the vein in his temple that always surfaced when he was cornered. I had not planned for what I actually saw. He didn't look at Amber. He didn't look at the laptop. He looked at me, and the expression on his face was something I had never seen in 42 years of raising him. Not guilt, not fury, recognition. Like he was seeing me for the first time, seeing the man behind the overalls and the engine grease and the act I'd been performing since October. The recording kept playing, and the next voice that came through the speaker wasn't Amber's anymore. It was Tyler's. His own words recorded without his knowledge, saying something I hadn't confronted him about yet. Something worse than the deed. Worse than the money. Amber stood up, hands flat on the table, mouth open, no words. I kept my eyes on Tyler. My finger hovered over the pause button. "Do you want to hear more?" I pressed play. Tyler's recorded voice filled the dining room. His own words about the physician's statement about timing the incapacity filing for when I'd be too confused to contest it. About Caldwell drafting the paperwork. Every syllable landed like a hammer on glass. Amber moved first. Her hand shot across the table and caught the edge of the laptop screen. A cider glass went sideways and shattered on the hardwood amber liquid spreading toward the napkins. But Wren was faster. She caught Amber's wrist before the screen folded shut, held it there with the grip of a woman who needs bread dough 14 hours a week. "Let go of me," Amber hissed. "No," Wren said. Tyler's chair scraped back. He stood up, face-white veins surfacing in his neck. He looked at the laptop. He looked at Wren's hand on his wife's wrist, and then something broke behind his eyes. Something I'd watched hold together for 42 years, and he swung his open palm across Wren's face. The crack was the loudest sound I've ever heard in that room. Wren's head snapped left. She didn't fall. She didn't let go of Amber's wrist. She turned back to face Tyler with her cheek going red and her eyes going hard, and she said nothing. I stood up slowly. My knees ached. My hands were steady. I looked at the corner of the ceiling, the small camera I'd installed 3 months ago, the one hidden behind the crown, molding the one that had been recording since we sat down for dinner. Then I looked at Tyler. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," I said, "and you made it on camera." His eyes went to the corner. He saw the camera. The color drained out of him so fast I thought he might pass out. What Tyler didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Nash Prescott was parked 2 blocks east on Garfield in a dark sedan, and 2 Wayne County officers were idling behind the Baptist church on the next street over. They'd been there since 6:30. I had called Nash before dinner and told him the confrontation would happen tonight, and I had asked him to be ready for whatever came next. I didn't know it would be this, but I knew it would be something. I picked up my phone and sent one text. 3 words. Come now. Assault. I taught that boy to throw a football in this same room, pushed the dining table against the wall on rainy Sundays, Doreen yelling about the lamp, Tyler laughing with his arm cocked back at 7 years old. And now I watched his hand drop to his side in the same 4 walls, my daughter's cheek swelling under the candlelight. And I couldn't find the 7-year-old anywhere in his face. Amber pulled her wrist free. She didn't run. She stood at the table and looked at the laptop still playing, and I watched her calculate. She was adding up what the camera had captured, what the recording contained, what the filed documents meant. You could almost hear the math failing. Sit down, I said. They sat. Wren pressed a napkin to her cheek. She didn't cry. She caught my eye and gave me a nod so small nobody else saw it. Nash came through the front door without knocking. Cold December air rushed in behind him, carrying the smell of exhaust and frozen ground. Behind him, 2 officers in dark jackets stepped onto the porch. Radio static crackling at their hips. You think you want justice until you see your son in handcuffs on Christmas Eve. Then you learn what justice actually costs. Nash spoke to the officers in the hallway, voice low and precise. The warrants cover both of them. Contract fraud conspiracy to seize elderly property. The domestic violence footage is uploading to the cloud now. The first officer stepped into the dining room. Tyler didn't resist. He stood up, put his hands behind his back, and stared at the Christmas tree while the cuffs clicked shut, that metallic ratcheting sound that once you hear it in your own house, you never unhear. Amber fought. Not physically, verbally. She stood rigid as the second officer guided her arms back, and she looked straight at me. Yeah, you planned this, she said. You planned all of this. You planned it first, I said. I just planned it better. The officers walked them to the front door. Red and blue lights pulsed through the curtains, painting the tinsel on the tree in colors Doreen would have hated. The neighbors' porch lights were clicking on one by one up and down the block. Nash stood beside me. Wren stood on my other side, still holding the napkin to her face. Tyler stopped at the threshold. The officer had a hand on his shoulder, but Tyler turned his head and found my eyes. I expected anger. I expected the curse I'd been bracing for since October. What I got was worse. He leaned toward me close enough that I could smell the ham on his breath, and he whispered 5 words. Did Mom ever tell you? The officer guided him down the steps. The cruiser door opened and closed. The red and blue lights pulled away from the curb and moved down Garfield Street until they were just a flicker between the trees. I stood on the porch. The air was 9 degrees and I was in my shirt sleeves and I couldn't feel any of it. Wren's hand found my arm. Dad, what did he say? I looked at her. The red mark on her cheek was already fading. The child inside her was 7 weeks old, and the boy in the back of that cruiser had just told me he knew, maybe always knew, the secret Doreen had carried to her grave. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. What do you do with a dining table after you've used it to destroy your own family? I stood in the doorway and looked at the wreckage. Shattered glass on the hardwood. Cranberry sauce smeared across the tablecloth. Candles burned down to nubs, and Tyler's 5 words still rattling around my skull like a loose bolt in an engine block. Did Mom ever tell you? He knew. Maybe always knew. And I was standing in my own dining room, trying to figure out if everything he'd done to me was about money or about blood. Wren was upstairs checking on Cohen. The boy had slept through all of it, the shouting, the handcuffs, the cruiser lights. 8 years old and dreaming about magnets. while his parents were driven away in the back of a police car on Christmas Eve. Nash came back through the front door, briefcase in hand. He'd walked the officers to their cars, made sure the paperwork was clean, confirmed the arraignment schedule. Now he set the briefcase on the stained tablecloth, clicked the clasps open, and pulled out a tablet. "Sit down, Vernon. There's one more piece." I sat. The guarantee contract Tyler had you sign, the one from October last year, contained a transfer clause on page 11. Any existing debt obligations follow the property to the new recipient. Tyler designed it to dump his liabilities onto you once the deed transferred. Nash turned the tablet to face me. Numbers glowed on the screen, columns, dates, balances. 6 weeks ago, through my firm, you purchased Tyler's outstanding debt portfolio on the secondary market. Wren appeared at the bottom of the stairs. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, listening. "Tyler owes creditors roughly $140,000, Nash continued. Failed developments, defaulted lines of credit, a construction loan from 2019 that went sideways. All of it was bundled and sold to a collection agency. You bought that bundle." "How much did it cost?" Wren asked. Nash looked at me. I nodded. 12 cents on the dollar, Nash said. $16,800. That's what your brother's entire financial life was worth on the open market. 12 cents on the dollar. Less than scrap metal. Less than the bolts I used to sweep off the factory floor at the end of a shift. My son's ambition, the developments, the shell company, the schemes reduced to a figure I could have pulled from a single month of my pension. But there was another layer, and Nash delivered it with the precision of a man who had been waiting weeks for this moment. The collection agency that held Tyler's debt was called Gracious Recovery Services. It's a subsidiary. He paused. Of Vance Financial Holdings. I let that settle. The Vances had been carrying Tyler's bad paper. Garrison's own company held the notes on every dollar Tyler owed. And when Nash's firm made the purchase offer through a blind trust, they accepted it without a second glance. Standard liquidation. Nothing unusual, 12 cents on the dollar wired to their own account. They sold me the weapon I needed, and they didn't even know they were doing it. So Tyler owes me now, I said. Every dollar, plus contractual interest at 9%. Nash set the tablet down. Legally, you own Tyler's future. What you do with that is up to you. I looked at the numbers on the screen. Each line was a decision Tyler had made, a project that failed, a loan he couldn't service, a promise he broke to someone who trusted him. His entire adult life reduced to columns and decimals on a single page. I had spent 40 years building engines that worked. Tyler had spent 15 years building deals that didn't, and now every one of those failures belonged to me. Nash began organizing his papers. Wren sat down across from me, the napkin still pressed against her cheek, though the swelling had gone down. "Daddy," she said, "when did you start planning this?" I looked at her. My daughter, pregnant, bruised, sitting in the ruins of a Christmas dinner that ended with her brother in a police car. From the day I understood what he wanted, I said. She held my eyes for a long moment. Then she turned to Nash. "Can he forgive it?" she asked quietly. "The debt, all of it. Does he have the legal right?" Nash closed his briefcase. He looked at Wren, then at me. "Yes," he said. "He can forgive every dollar with a single signed document." He paused. "But he hasn't asked me that question yet." The room went still. Somewhere down the block, a neighbor's Christmas music drifted through the walls, something with bells and a choir muffled by brick and cold air. I pushed back from the table and walked to the front door. The porch light was still on. The street was dark and empty, no more red and blue lights. Just black pavement and bare trees and the orange glow of street lamps reflecting off patches of old snow. I reached into my coat pocket and found the letter. Doreen's letter. The one from the wooden box. The one I'd read in the workshop the night everything changed. The paper was soft now, creased where I'd folded and unfolded it too many times. I opened it one more time and read the last line by the porch light. Her handwriting, her voice in my head. I whispered the only answer I had. I chose him. Every day. And I'd choose him again. I folded the letter, put it back in my pocket, and stood there until the cold finally reached my bones. Then I turned around and walked back inside, because there was broken glass to sweep up, and a grandson sleeping upstairs, and a decision I wasn't ready to make. Not tonight, not on Christmas Eve, not with Tyler's whisper still echoing in the place where my certainty used to be. I didn't sleep that night. I swept the broken glass, wiped the cranberry off the tablecloth, and sat in the kitchen until the sky turned gray. The debt papers were in Nash's briefcase, Doreen's letter was in my pocket, and Tyler's whisper was in every room of the house, bouncing off walls I'd built with my own hands. The phone rang at 7:14 on Christmas morning. Nash didn't say Merry Christmas. It's over, he said. I set my coffee down. Steam curled up from the mug into the cold kitchen air. Through the doorway, the Christmas tree still glowed with tinsel that caught the first gray light. The regulatory filing triggered a full audit of Vance Financial Holdings. Nash said, his voice crackling through the phone speaker. Gratiot Avenue Pawn Shop has been seized. State investigators found 12 years of predatory lending interest rates that would make a loan shark blush forged appraisals. Liens filed against elderly customers who never understood what they signed. Garrison and Lorraine are both named in the complaint. I listened. Wren came downstairs in her robe, saw my face, and sat across from me without a word. But here's what you need to hear, Nash continued. The investigation turned up internal correspondence from 4 years ago. Emails between Garrison and Lorraine discussing Tyler specifically. They identified him as a failed broker with a father who owned undervalued property in a redevelopment corridor. They selected Amber to make the approach. I said nothing for a long time. The marriage was engineered, Nash said. The Vances picked Tyler because of the house and the shop. Amber was positioned, not in love, in position. I ended the call and set the phone on the table. Wren had heard enough through the speaker. So she's a victim too, Wren said. Why, she's a victim who chose to keep playing after she knew the rules. Wren looked at the table. I looked at my coffee. Somewhere upstairs, Cohen was still sleeping a boy whose mother had been arrested 12 hours ago, whose grandparents had orchestrated his parents' marriage like a business acquisition. 4 years they spent setting the trap. Picking the girl, timing the courtship, waiting for Tyler to get desperate enough to bring her home. 4 years of Sunday dinners and birthday cards and pretending to be family while they measured the square footage and calculated the lot value. And not once did it occur to them that the old man at the end of the plan might be smarter than all of them combined. I poured Wren a cup of coffee. We sat together in the quiet, and then I did something I should have done weeks ago. I opened Nash's briefcase. He'd left it on purpose, I realized now, and pulled out a manila folder I hadn't shown anyone. Inside were 3 documents. The first was the machine shop reclamation, already proceeding through the county. The second was Tyler's debt portfolio purchased and transferred. The third was a property registration dated 3 years earlier. I slid the third document across the table. Wren picked it up, read the header, read it again. The Petoskey Lodge, she said slowly. This is the mountain property up north, the one Mom used to talk about. $380,000 in the current resort redevelopment assessment, I said. It's in your name. Wren looked at me the way I'd always wanted my children to look at me, not with pity, not with obligation, but with the slow recognition that their father had been standing guard the whole time, even when he looked like he was falling apart. Since when? She whispered. To 3 years. Your mother picked the name on the paperwork before she passed. She wanted you to have something that couldn't be touched, no matter what happened to the house or the shop or any of it. Wren's eyes filled. She pressed her fingers against the document like she could feel Doreen's handwriting through the print. Dad, you've been playing chess this whole time. While we thought you were barely surviving, surviving is chess, sweetheart. It always was. She sat with that for a minute, turning the page over, reading the registration details, the legal descriptions, the assessed values. Then she stopped. Her finger landed on a line near the bottom of the second page, the contingent beneficiary clause. Dad. I see it. Tyler's name is on here. She looked up at me. I held her gaze. Yes. Tyler's name was listed as contingent beneficiary. I had put it there the same week I registered the property. 3 years ago, before the guarantee, before the deed, before any of it. I had sat in a lawyer's office and written my son's name on a document that would protect his children even if everything else burned down. Even while I was building walls against what Tyler might become, I was leaving a door open for who he used to be. Wren set the paper down. She opened her mouth, and nothing came out. She closed it. She picked up her coffee with both hands and stared at the steam. When did you buy the lodge? She finally asked. When your mother was alive. She chose the name on paper. The kitchen was quiet. Morning light fell across the unwashed Christmas dishes stacked by the sink. The pine smell from the tree in the next room mixed with coffee and cold air. Somewhere down the block, church bells rang 9 o'clock service, same bells I'd heard every Christmas for 30 years. I gathered the documents and put them back in the folder. The machine shop was coming home. The lodge was safe. The Vance empire was collapsing under the weight of its own greed, and my son was sitting in a county holding facility on Christmas morning, wearing someone else's clothes, waiting for an arraignment that would determine the shape of his next decade. I had won. Every piece, every move, every counter-contract, all of it had landed exactly where I aimed. And I had never felt less like celebrating in my life. The back porch had always been where the truth came out in this family. Doreen sat on that same railing when she told me about the diagnosis. Wren cried on those steps after her first heartbreak at 16. And now Christmas evening, with the sky going purple over the rooftops and their breath hanging white in the cold. Leo and Wren sat side by side on the top step while I listened through the cracked kitchen door. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was standing guard. There's a difference. I need to tell you something, Leo said. His voice was steady but careful, the way a man sounds when he's practiced the words, but not the courage. I helped your father because I love you. That part was never strategy, but my father needed this too. Wren didn't move. Nash wanted the Vance evidence to close a wound from 10 years ago. The same forged deed scheme, different victim. When I brought him your father's case, he saw the connection. He would have taken it eventually, but I pushed him. I told him I'd leave the firm if he didn't help. The porch was quiet. A car passed on the street, tires hissing on wet pavement. So your father didn't do this for free, Wren said. No. He did it for his own reasons and mine. I can't pretend otherwise. Wren turned to look at him. I couldn't see her face from behind the door, but I could hear her breathing slow, measured the way she breathes when she's deciding something important. You helped my father when no one else would, she said. Whatever the reason, that's what happened. Leo exhaled. Wren leaned into his shoulder. The dusk settled over them like a blanket, and I stepped back from the door and let them have it. Nobody does the right thing for only one reason. That's not how people work. Leo loved my daughter and needed to prove something to his father. Nash wanted justice and wanted revenge. Benny switched sides out of conscience and self-preservation both. Even Hank turned because his heart broke and because he was afraid of prison. Every alliance I built over the last 14 months was held together by mixed motives, and I was fine with that, because mixed motives are the only kind that last. What do you call a man who stays for 42 years knowing the truth? A fool, a saint, or just a father who decided that love doesn't need a blood test. I was still asking myself that question when the phone rang the next morning. December 26th. The kitchen tile was cold under my bare feet. The Christmas tree in the next room was already dropping needles, filling the house with dry pine. I picked up on the second ring. Static. Background noise, metal doors, distant voices, the institutional echo of a place built for waiting. Dad. Tyler's voice. Smaller than I'd ever heard it. Not the voice of a man who planned and schemed and slid envelopes across tables. The voice of a boy who got caught. "I'm here," I said. A long pause. I could hear him breathing. "Did you know," he said, "about my real father?" I closed my eyes. The kitchen clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. "Since the day you were born," I said. "Your mother told me before the delivery. I chose to stay." Silence. 10 seconds. 15. I counted them by the clock. Tyler said I should have left, and for 1 second, just one, I let myself wonder what my life would have looked like if I had. A different house. A different city. No Tyler. No Amber. No Cohen. No guarantee contract, no recordings, no Christmas Eve arrests. A simpler life. A smaller one. "You should have left a long time ago," Tyler whispered. "That's not how fathers work, Tyler." The line crackled. I heard him swallow. I heard something that might have been a breath, or might have been something else, and I didn't ask which. "I have to go," he said. "I know." The call ended. I set the phone on the counter and stood there with my hand on it for a long time, feeling the plastic warm under my palm. Then I picked it up again and called Nash. "2 things," I said. "Send Tyler the letter. Doreen's letter, the one from the box. Through legal channels, sealed his eyes only." I paused. "And set up a trust. 50,000. For the baby. No conditions, no strings." Nash's pen scratched against paper on the other end. "The 40 you mentioned on Christmas Eve, or a new amount?" "I knew 50, from the shop proceeds when they clear." "Understood." A pause. "Vernon, there's something else. I didn't want to bring it up yesterday, but you need to know." I waited. Tyler's biological father, the man in the photograph from Doreen's box. His name was Gerald Vance, Garrison's younger brother. He died in 2019. No will, no probate filed, which means there may be unclaimed property in the Vance estate that Tyler has a legal right to as a direct descendant. I sat down. Gerald Vance. The man in the photograph wearing the Vance Industrial Partners uniform. Tyler's bloodfather was a Vance, which meant Tyler, the son I raised. The son who tried to take my house, was legally tied to the family that targeted us. And somewhere in that collapsing empire was property that belonged to him by blood right. The son who tried to steal from me might inherit from the people who sent him. "Does Tyler know?" I asked. "No, and he won't unless someone tells him." I looked at the kitchen. Morning light on unwashed dishes. The tree-dropping needles in the next room. Doreen's letter already on its way to a holding facility, carrying 40 years of truth in her handwriting. Nash waited. I said the only thing I had left. "But these are the 2 things I'm most certain of today. He's my son, and he deserves to know." I told Nash to send Tyler the information about the unclaimed inheritance. Not as a weapon, not as leverage. Just the facts, a name, a file, a right he was born with. Every man deserves to know where he came from, even if where he came from is the family that tried to destroy his father. That was January. By April, I was standing on the machine shop floor for the last time. The place smelled the same as it did 35 years ago. Diesel oil, concrete dust, and the ghost of every engine I ever rebuilt. The overhead lights were off. The tool racks were empty. The hydraulic lift I'd installed in 1994 was still bolted to the floor, too heavy to move, waiting for whatever came next. Nash had finalized the sale to the city at $840,000. Tech center. Servers' offices. Glass walls, the kind of building where people sit at desks and never get grease on their hands. I negotiated one condition, a bronze plaque in Doreen's name at the entrance, and a bench beside it where someone could sit and watch the street. Ren walked the floor with me. Her belly was showing now 5 months along Leo's ring on her finger since March. She held my hand as we crossed the empty bay where I used to line up the diesel blocks for overhaul, our footsteps echoing off bare walls. Mom would have hated a plaque, she said. She would have wanted a bench. I asked for both. She squeezed my hand. We stood in the middle of the floor and said nothing for a long time. 35 years of noise and grease and purpose, sold for a number that would have made Doreen laugh and cry at the same time. They'll build something shiny on that concrete floor. They'll fill it with screens and cables and people who've never held a torque wrench. But underneath it all, Doreen Holbrook's name will be stamped in bronze, and that's enough for me. Summer came. Ren and Leo drove north to Petoskey to start renovating the lodge. I followed a week later and found Hank already there, 69 years old, still built like a fence post, sanding the porch railing with the patience of a man paying off a debt that had nothing to do with money. He'd earned his way back board by board. He showed up the day after New Year's and asked Ren if she needed help with the lodge. She looked at me. I nodded, and Hank went to work the way he always worked, slow, careful, like he owed the wood an apology. One evening, we sat on the half-finished porch, watching the sun drop behind the pines. The lake was still. Leo and Ren were inside arguing about cabinet hardware, their voices warm through the screen door. Vernon, Hank said. Any regrets? I thought about it. I gave him an honest answer. I regret not hiring a lawyer when I signed that guarantee, and not being a better father to Tyler when he was young. Otherwise, no. Hank nodded. He picked up his sandpaper and went back to the railing. That was all he needed. The months passed, the way months do when you stop fighting quietly with small repairs. Benny Farrell sent a postcard from Toledo. Nash closed the Vance prosecution files and took Leo on as a junior associate. Ren's belly grew. The lodge took shape, and Tyler served his sentence in a facility downstate, where I'm told he enrolled in a vocational program and stopped talking to the Vances entirely. I didn't visit. I wasn't ready. But I made sure the trust was funded, and I made sure Nash delivered Doreen's letter. And I made sure Tyler knew the door on Verner Highway was still his door if he ever wanted to walk through it. December came around again. Christmas Eve, 2024. 1 year exactly. Ren and Leo drove down from Petoskey with a trunk full of gifts and a belly that barely fit behind the steering wheel. Cohen was there living with Ren, now enrolled in school near the bakery, building model engines at the kitchen table on weekends. He was 9 and he was fine. And that was the miracle nobody talks about in these stories. The kid who sleeps through the war and wakes up whole. Cohen fell asleep on the rug the same way Tyler used to, one arm tucked under his cheek, mouth open, completely trusting that the house would still be there when he woke up. I sat in my chair by the fireplace. The tree had lights this year, not tinsel. Ren's choice. Doreen's tradition carried forward. I reached into the drawer beside my chair and pulled out the last copy of the temporary guarantee, the document that started everything, the one Tyler slid across this same table 2 Octobers ago. I held it over the fire and let it go. The paper curled, browned, caught. The flames ate the signature line first, then the clauses, then the notary seal. 30 seconds, and it was ash. "What are you thinking, Dad?" Ren asked from the couch, Leo's arm around her shoulders. "Fix what's broken," I said. "Let go of what's ruined. Keep what's still working." She smiled. Leo nodded. Cohen breathed. I noticed it then, a small envelope tucked behind Doreen's photograph on the mantel. I reached for it. A Christmas card postmarked from a halfway house downstate. No return name on the envelope. I opened it. One sentence in handwriting I'd know anywhere. Thank you for choosing me. I read it twice. I set it on the mantel beside Doreen's photograph, beside the bronze plaque receipt, beside the life I'd built, and nearly lost and fought like hell to keep. Snow fell on Werner Highway. A cold flake drifted through the cracked window and melted on the back of my hand. The house still stands, my name on the papers, my grandchild's breathing on the floor, and the fireplace still warm. And to you, listening to my story, remember this. Not every battle is fought with fists. Some are fought with patience, with paperwork, and with the quiet decision to keep loving someone who is trying to destroy you. If I could go back, I would have asked harder questions the day my son moved in. I would have read every page before I signed. I would have spoken up sooner instead of waiting for the damage to pile up. Don't make my mistake. Don't let trust become an excuse to stop paying attention. The people closest to you are the ones who can hurt you the most. And love does not mean you hand over everything without looking. This family story taught me that real strength is not revenge. It is choosing your family even when they don't choose you back. I believe God put me through this for a reason, to learn that a father's love is not about blood or paper. It is about showing up every single day and deciding that the people under your roof are yours to protect. This family story is not just mine. It belongs to every parent who ever stayed when leaving would have been easier. And if you carry a family story of your own, one that tested everything you believed, then you already know that the hardest victories are the quiet ones. If this story moved you, I would be grateful if you left a comment and told me what you would have done in my place. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this one, please subscribe to Dad's Revenge Stories. I have more to tell. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. This story contains fictional elements added for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is coincidental. The message, that is what I hope, stays with you.